When you argue with someone who isn't interested in listening, learning, or finding common ground, you're not engaging in a meaningful conversation. You're stepping into an emotional battleground where logic has no place. And here's what most people don't realize. Arguing with fools isn't just unproductive, it's emotionally expensive. It drains your energy, hijacks your focus, and leaves you mentally exhausted, all while accomplishing absolutely nothing. Think about the last time you found yourself in a back and forth with someone who clearly wasn't there to understand you. Maybe it was online, maybe it was at work, maybe it was someone in your own family. And if you're honest with yourself, how did you feel afterward? Frustrated? Angry? Drained? That's the cost. That's what happens when you try to reason with someone who isn't reasoning at all. They're reacting. They're trying to win. They're not there for truth. They're there for control. And if you're not careful, you get pulled into their storm. You start raising your voice. You start defending yourself. You start proving your point harder and harder as if that's going to make a difference. But it never does. Because someone who argues just to argue will always find a way to twist your words. You could be absolutely right, and they'll still find a way to make you feel wrong. That's their power. It's their game. And the moment you play it, you've already lost. Not because you're incorrect, but because you gave them your energy, your presence, your attention. It's like giving your power away one reaction at a time. There's a reason why emotionally intelligent people don't argue with fools. It's not because they're passive. It's not because they don't have something valuable to say. It's because they've learned the hard way that not every battle is worth fighting, especially when it's with someone who thrives on conflict. When you give your energy to someone who's not capable of receiving it with respect and intention, it's like pouring water into a cup with holes in the bottom. No matter how much you give, it never holds. It never fills. And eventually, you're left empty. What's worse is that these kinds of arguments often linger. You replay them in your head. You think about what you should have said. You dwell on their rudeness, their ignorance, their stubbornness. That mental loop, that's more energy lost. That's more of your focus being stolen by someone who didn't even deserve your time in the first place. This is why mastering your emotional energy is so important. It's why boundaries are not just about saying no, they're about knowing when to stay silent. There's a power in silence that most people overlook. Silence doesn't mean surrender. It means strategy. It means you're choosing to protect your peace instead of proving your point. Because when someone is committed to misunderstanding you, no amount of explanation will change their mind. And trying to force it, that's the truth. Every time you argue with a fool, you're stepping off your path and onto theirs. And guess what? They're not going anywhere. They don't have direction. They don't have growth. They don't want clarity. They want conflict, because conflict gives them attention. It gives them a momentary sense of power. And when you feed that, you fuel their fire. But when you stay calm, when you choose not to engage, that's when you win. Because you're no longer responding from emotion, you're responding from self-respect. You're saying, I don't need to fight to prove my worth. I don't need to argue to feel seen. I know who I am, and I'm not lowering my standards just to meet someone in the mud. And that is the mindset that creates peace, confidence, and long-term success. So the next time someone tries to pull you into a senseless argument, remember this. Your energy is valuable. Your time is limited. Your emotional health is not up for negotiation. You don't have to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't have to justify your boundaries to people who aren't even listening. Walk away, not because you're weak, but because you're strong enough to know that your energy belongs to something bigger than an ego match with someone who isn't even operating from truth. Let them argue with themselves. You've got better things to do. You lose control the moment you fight on someone else's level, especially when that level is driven by negativity, ego, or emotional immaturity. What most people don't realize is that arguments aren't just about words. They're about power. When someone provokes you, when they push your buttons, when they bait you into a fight, they're not doing it by accident. They're doing it because they want you to react. They want you to get emotional. They want you to abandon your logic and meet them in the mud. Because the moment you do that, they're in control. And you're not. Think about this. When you're calm, you think clearly. You lead yourself with intention. You respond rather than react. But when someone pulls you into an argument, especially someone who isn't speaking from reason, they disrupt that clarity. They draw you into a space where the goal isn't truth, it's dominance. The louder voice wins, the more dramatic response takes over, and suddenly you're no longer engaging in a conversation. You're engaging in a battle of egos. That's what happens when you fight on someone else's level. You stop leading yourself and start reacting to someone else's chaos. This is how people get manipulated without even realizing it. One minute you're standing in your power, staying focused on your values and priorities. The next, you're triggered, defensive, and caught up in proving yourself to someone who isn't even interested in understanding you. That's not strength. That's being hijacked emotionally, and it happens all the time. At work, in relationships, online. One comment, one insult, one ignorant remark, and you're pulled into someone else's drama. And while you're fighting back, your energy is being drained, your attention is being scattered, and your peace is being stolen. You don't rise by lowering yourself. And you certainly don't win by stepping into someone else's emotional mess and pretending you can clean it up with logic. That's not how it works. You can't use facts to fight with someone who thrives on feelings. You can't use reason with someone who's committed to being unreasonable. When you try, it's like trying to wrestle with a shadow. No matter how much effort you put in, there's no real opponent, just a reflection of something that doesn't change. That's what it means to fight on their level. It means abandoning your clarity to match their confusion. And here's the truth. Real power doesn't fight to be seen. It doesn't need to shout to be heard. Real power is quiet, composed, and rooted. It knows that sometimes the most powerful move is to not respond, to not engage, to walk away, because in doing that, you're not surrendering. You're taking control. You're deciding that you won't let someone else's behavior dictate your emotions. You're choosing to protect your energy instead of wasting it trying to correct someone who isn't open to growth. This doesn't mean you never stand up for yourself. It doesn't mean you let people walk all over you. But it does mean that you stop letting people pull you out of alignment. It means you start recognizing when an argument isn't about solving a problem, it's about someone else trying to drag you down. And instead of getting pulled in, you stand tall, you stay grounded, You remember who you are and what you're here to do. You don't need to fight every battle. Not every comment deserves your attention. Not every criticism needs your defense. Most of the time, the people who come at you aren't doing it because they're right. They're doing it because they're insecure, bored, or threatened by your confidence. So instead of stepping into their game, step back. Let them play it alone. Let them spin in their own confusion. Because here's the thing, you can't rise and fight petty battles at the same time. You can't build a meaningful life while constantly defending yourself against meaningless attacks. And you certainly can't grow while being dragged into emotional chaos. You grow by staying grounded. You rise by staying focused. You win by walking away from anything that pulls you out of your power. So the next time you feel the urge to argue back, pause. Ask yourself, is this worth my peace? Is this moving me forward or just pulling me sideways? And if the answer is no, then don't go there. Keep your power, protect your energy, and remember, when you fight on someone else's level, you're no longer leading, you're following. And you were made for more than that. Silence is one of the most misunderstood forms of communication. Most people think silence is weakness, that not speaking up means you don't have anything to say or that you're letting someone else win. But that's not true. In reality, silence, when it comes from a place of strength and clarity, is one of the most strategic, powerful tools you have. It's the ability to say, I know what you're trying to do, and I refuse to play that game. It's a sign of emotional maturity, not defeat. When you're dealing with someone who's trying to provoke you, the biggest mistake you can make is to match their energy. They want to argue. They want to get a reaction. They want to pull you into their chaos so they can feel in control. The moment you raise your voice, get defensive, or try to over-explain yourself, you're feeding their fire. You're giving them exactly what they want, your attention. And attention is fuel. That's what they thrive on. That's why silence can be such a disruption to that pattern. Silence, when intentional, puts you back in the driver's seat. Instead of reacting, you're observing. Instead of engaging, you're preserving. You're showing that not everything deserves your words, your energy, or your validation. You're demonstrating that you don't need to prove your intelligence to someone who isn't listening anyway. That's not cowardice, it's wisdom. Because arguing with someone who is committed to misunderstanding you is like trying to teach someone who has no interest in learning. It doesn't matter how clear, calm, or correct you are, they've already decided not to hear you. That's when silence becomes your strategy, not as a way of giving up, but as a way of rising above. You're saying, I won't lower myself just to be understood by someone who's not even listening. You're saying, my peace is more important than your opinion. And you're saying it without saying a word. That's powerful. That's presence. There's something unsettling about silence to someone who's trying to start a fight. They expect you to push back. They expect you to defend yourself. When you don't, it forces them to confront their own behavior. And that can be incredibly uncomfortable for them. They lose the control they thought they had. They're left standing there, swinging at the air, because you've removed yourself from the game entirely. That's when silence becomes not just powerful, but disruptive in the best possible way. Now, let's be clear. This isn't about avoiding conflict altogether. There are times when you need to speak up, take a stand, or have a difficult conversation. But what we're talking about here isn't productive conflict. It's noise. It's people trying to bait you into drama. It's people who care more about being right than being real. And those situations, they don't require a long explanation. They don't require emotional effort. They require distance, and silence is a beautiful way to create it. Choosing silence doesn't mean you're ignoring the problem. It means you're choosing not to waste energy on a solution that will never come through argument. It means you're recognizing that some people aren't looking for truth. They're looking for control. And the moment you realize that, you gain your power back. You stop chasing validation. You stop engaging in loops that go nowhere. You start focusing on what actually matters: your energy, your goals, your growth. There's a deep kind of confidence that comes from knowing you don't have to respond to every challenge that comes your way. You can see the bait, the trap, the ego, and you can walk right past it. That's strength. That's emotional intelligence. And that's something a lot of people never develop because they're too busy trying to win arguments instead of winning their peace. In a world that constantly pushes you to respond, to defend, to prove, silence is a radical choice. It says, I trust myself enough to not explain myself to people who don't value me. It says, I don't need to win this fight because I'm not even in it. And it says, my focus is bigger than this moment, bigger than this person, and bigger than this drama. So the next time someone tries to get a rise out of you, don't rise. Stay grounded. Stay still. Say nothing. Because sometimes the loudest message you can send is delivered in silence, and it echoes longer than any argument ever could. High performers think differently. They don't just manage their time, they guard their energy. They know that success isn't just about doing more, it's about doing what matters most. And that includes protecting their peace. They don't waste their mental bandwidth arguing with people who are committed to misunderstanding them. They don't chase validation from the wrong crowd. They don't let petty distractions derail their momentum. Instead, they operate with intention, focus, and emotional discipline. And one of the clearest indicators of that discipline is knowing when to walk away from conflict that serves no purpose. When someone tries to argue with you, especially over something trivial or rooted in ego, you have a choice. Do you engage and exhaust yourself trying to prove a point? Or do you step back and protect your mental clarity? High performers choose the latter. Not because they're passive, not because they're avoiding confrontation, but because they understand that their mind is their greatest asset. They refuse to hand it over to someone who's not coming from a place of reason, respect, or relevance. They don't need to win every argument. They don't need to explain themselves to people who aren't even listening. They're not interested in emotional tug-of-wars. Why? Because they have goals. They have vision. And they know that arguing with someone who isn't open to learning is like trying to water dead soil. It doesn't matter how right you are, nothing's gonna grow from it. That realization frees them. It keeps them in control of their reactions. It keeps them focused on what actually moves the needle. One of the most powerful traits of high performers is that they don't seek unnecessary battles. They pick their challenges wisely. If it's not going to matter 5 days from now, let alone 5 years, they let it go. They don't carry emotional baggage from a pointless debate. They don't lose sleep over someone's ignorance. because they've trained themselves to understand the cost of energy. Every time you react, you spend a piece of yourself. And high performers, they're not making those kinds of emotional withdrawals on things that don't pay them back. This mindset creates peace. Not just the kind of peace that feels good, but the kind that fuels productivity. When your mind is free from drama, your decisions are sharper. When you're not replaying arguments in your head, your creativity is stronger. When you're not defending yourself to people who aren't qualified to judge you, your confidence becomes unshakable. That's the zone high performers stay in. Not because they're perfect, but because they've learned how to stay out of the traps most people fall into. You see, people who constantly argue are often projecting. They're unhappy, they're insecure, they're bored, and they want to pull others into that emotional state. It's not about the topic. They just want to feel important. But high performers don't let that bait hook them. They see it for what it is, a distraction. And their success depends on not getting distracted. They know that every minute spent in a pointless argument is a minute taken away from building, learning, improving, and they know those minutes add up. You can't get them back. That's why they protect them. They protect their peace like it's a business asset, because it is. Mental clarity isn't just about feeling better. It's about performing better. Making better decisions, leading better teams, showing up more powerfully in every room they walk into. And that all starts with boundaries. Boundaries with people, boundaries with situations, boundaries with their own emotions. High performers don't react just because something provokes them. They pause. They evaluate. They ask themselves, is this worth my energy? Is this aligned with who I'm becoming? And if the answer is no, they move on. Not out of arrogance, but out of purpose. They understand that peace isn't passive. Peace is a decision. Peace is a filter. Peace is the foundation for everything they build. You can't create something meaningful while constantly defending yourself against noise. You can't stay in your zone of genius while letting every fool pull you into theirs. You rise by staying above. You grow by staying focused. And you win by staying aligned with what matters. So if you want to step into that next level of performance, stop giving your power to every pointless argument. Stop explaining yourself to people who aren't interested in understanding. Start protecting your peace like it's your greatest investment, because it is. The more peace you preserve, the more power you reclaim, and the more power you hold, the higher you perform, not just in your work, but in your life.